Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eaterberg, and today I'll be discussing the 1929 film, The Broadway Melody, with my friend Kevin Pettit, who writes the See You at the Movies newsletter. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to do this.
So before we get into the film, just remind listeners where they can find your work and what you've been up to.
Yeah, you can find me on Substack. My Substack, as Jonathan said, is See You at the Movies. And yeah, I do like weekly reviews, lists, stuff like that. And I just posted my Sinners review, which is really good. I'm not sure when this comes out, but if you haven't seen Sinners, you're crazy. Go see it. It's the best movie of 2025. So yeah, you can find me on there.
Fantastic. High praise there. Well, before we get into the Broadway Melody, I want to kind of update our place in history, like I've been doing with the films this year. Our last film debuted on Christmas Day of 1928, so right towards the end of the year. And this one's coming out February 1st of 1929 initially. So we had a couple notable births that I found in the intervening couple weeks. December 30th of 28, Bo Diddley, the musician, was born. January 3rd, someone who I'm sure we're going to return to at some point down the road, Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone was born. And January 15th, Martin Luther King Jr. arrived. So obviously, that's why we celebrate his birthday in Martin Luther King Day in mid-January there. It's right around his actual birthday. On the other side, we had a couple of notable passings. January 5th, the actor Mark McDermott, who you might not recognize unless you listen to my episode on Glorious Betsy. He played Betsy's father in the Glorious Betsy film that we reviewed a couple episodes back. And on January 13th, Wyatt Earp, the famous deputy sheriff from out west, passed away.
Oh, sorry. That's I've been watching a lot of westerns, and you brought up Sergio Leone. If you have Tubi, I try to sing Tubi's praises all the time. Like
Yeah.
they have a ton of Sergio Leone. They have a lot of John Ford, and one of my favorite movies of all time, not just Tombstone, but if you ever get a chance, My Darling Clementine, which I think is John Ford's like masterpiece. It is really, really good. So man, rest in peace, Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously he's been portrayed in films a number of time over the years, so very very famous for that. In terms of some other historical events, December 26th of 1928 saw the first sales of Double Bubble chewing gum. So they just missed the Christmas Double Bubble rush there in 28. On January 1st of 1929, the 15th annual Rose Bowl game took place. It featured the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets over the Cal Golden Bears by a score of 8-7, which we don't get football scores like 8-7 anymore, which is sad in some ways.
Some we do in the Big Ten. We will get some 8 to 7. I feel like.
That's true. That's true. January 6th, which I guess is kind of a day that lives in infamy now, but in 1929, Heinrich Himmler was appointed as the Reichsfuhrer by Adolf Hitler. Obviously, he would rise to power and be a strong figure in the German side of World War II. In January 8th through the 20th, there's a series of royal decrees by the new dictatorship in Yugoslavia, removing rights to public assembly, banning of foreign newspapers that were criticizing the dictatorship, and dissolving political parties related to Croatia. Anything with Croatia in their names was abolished. And a little bit more relevant to our conversation for the next Oscars on January 29th, the novel version of All Quiet on the Western Front was first published. So for those who know, that film won the Oscar for Best Picture at the next Oscar, so we'll be getting that in due time. Any other historical notes you want to add to the mix?
I don't really think I have anything else. I think you pretty much covered some pretty heavy hitters. So I'm excited to get into the Broadway Melody.
Perfect. Well, the Broadway Melody premiered on February 1st, 1929 at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. It was premiered in New York a week later and then arrived across the United States in June of that year. Film was directed by Harry Beaumont and written by Sarah Y. Mason, Norman Houston, and James Gleason, based on a story by Edmund Golding.
The Broadway Melody stars Anita Page as Queenie Mahoney, Bessie Love as Harriet Hank Mahoney, and Charles King as Eddie Kearns. The Broadway Melody has a runtime of 100 minutes and was produced by Irving Thalberg and Lawrence Weingarten and distributed by Metro Goldwyn Mayer.
The film won the award for Outstanding Picture, as you mentioned at the top, now known as Best Picture, at the Second Academy Awards, and it also garnered nominations for Beaumont for Best Director and for Love for Best Actress. You can pretty easily find the film on YouTube, and it also has a readily available DVD release as well. So it's widely available for you if you want to check it out. So we'll jump right into the film. Obviously, it opens with some really cool aerial shots, which I wish we'd gotten more of that throughout the rest of the film, because those I it was the very first thing I wrote down, that had some really cool aerial shots
They
of New
might
York
be the
City.
most interesting directing in the entire film.
Agreed.
And you're like, "Wow, I'm in for a real treat." Cut to just some boring, office newsroom with Eddie singing the title
Yep,
of
singing the Broadway Melody.
of the Broadway Melody, and immediately I'm like, "This just seems very." I guess we don't have to talk about our thoughts yet. We can run through it, but I was just immediately like, okay, I am so into this. I'm loving these shots in New York. I wish this was more of a New York story than it actually feels like. Even though people are talking about the New York dream and moving here and stuff like that, I just don't really feel it. But you can continue with the plot. Well, I'll just come in whenever.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so you're right. We get the shots of them in the music rehearsal rooms, and it's something that I wrote down a couple times in my notes. Of it feels like the story, and I'm doing story in air quotes, is just there to support the music and show that hey, we can do music on film now. That seemed like it was the whole point from beginning to end of the entire film.
Yeah, it does feel like we're in that age of like the talkies versus the silent, and we just wanted to prove that like we have the technology, which again, like that is so important. It is very, very historically important and was so revolutionary for the time. I just wish it was better. And the music was better and the directing was better. But I think it's just to show that like we can get a group of people on screen and do some type of musical number. That's fantastic, and that's exactly what we opened with Eddie with the titular, song title.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually I enjoyed that song, and I'm assuming that it was, his voice, Charles King. I'm assuming it was Charles King who was doing the actual singing there. Actually was watching another film for this project where it wasn't the lead actor who was singing, but I believe King was a singer initially and then came to Hollywood to do some of these things during that time. I actually like that song. And it's catchy. It's comes up a couple times throughout the film. Obviously, it's the title song.
Yeah, just for me, I just feel like it's good the first time, we then hear it like 4 or 5 times again.
Yeah.
As someone even says in the middle of I believe it's Queenie listening to the love song later in the film, Mr. Xander or Zan he's like,
Is that
"Turn that off.
Zanfield?
Put on the Broadway Melody." I'm like, "Ah, here we go again. Okay."
Yeah, yeah, they definitely kind of beat it to death by the end of the film, and it gets a little repetitive. But yeah, so he's singing the song, and then he's raving about these two sisters, Queenie and Hank, that he knows, and they're coming to New York, and they're going to try and make it big. And then our next scene, we jump right into meeting the two of them in their apartment as they wait for Eddie to come over. And we get some scenes of them kind of changing out of their clothes. That was a little surprising, and we talked about this with Wings a little bit with the guys in the in the in the background of the one scene where they're naked, but the girls are in the tub, and you don't see anything per se, but it's obviously left to the imagination a little bit.
It is kind of funny. You have like in your notes about like looking at reviews of the time, and I was reading through some reviews and they're saying like how sexy and like scintillating
Yeah.
this was for the time, and seeing these women undress and get like back and forth. And I'm like, as I just said, I just saw Sinners, and I'm like, that would cause people to have aneurysms in their brain if they knew what like the kind of stuff we're putting out
Right.
nowadays.
Well, even look at the most recent Best Picture winner, Honora. I mean, it's
The
it
first
doesn't get more scandalous and scintillating than
the
some of the
first
stuff there.
45 minutes of Anora would blow some brains away in,
Yeah,
the 1920s. So,
absolutely.
yeah, but I remember looking at some reviews just being like, how sexy and crazy it was for these 2 sisters, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess for the time, it was pretty good.
Yeah. So eventually Eddie comes in and he gets them set up with a tryout with Mr. Zanfield, the producer of the show. And so they get to the dance hall, the theater, whatever it is, and try and do their act. And of course, the one of the dancing girls kind of sabotages the piano player a little bit, so it kind of messes up their audition, and they don't get taken into the show, unfortunately, even though Eddie had basically said it was a done deal before they got started.
Yeah, I think she puts like a purse or
Yeah,
something
something like
on
that.
the strings. And he's like, "You're playing off key. You're ruining it. You're ruining it. Oh,
Yeah.
whatever. Just keep going. You don't." I just don't understand like why we wouldn't just like pause and just fix the piano. I get it's
Yeah.
for like the plot of the film, but like,
Yeah, it's a gag.
and I'm not going to nitpick a film from the 1929. Like that's ridiculous to me because it's all for entertainment purposes, like most, like all film. But I was just like, this is silly. This is so silly. And again, really uninteresting direction at this point. It's just like just shooting just them like walking across a room, just
Yeah.
like singing and dancing while this is off key. Make I just there's something just feels like really off with the comedy in this film. Like in the previous scene, they're like trying not to tip the bellboy, and I'm like, it's not coming off as hilarity. It's more coming off as like they're just mean.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
felt like many of the characters, I eventually was kind of tied. I thought the most interesting character for me in the film, and I'll see what you think, is Queenie. I think Queenie at least has the most, and Hank to a degree too. But like, I think a lot of people are lacking in any like desirable traits that like glue me to the screen,
Yeah.
and also the direction where I'm just like, I am bored. I am bored by what is happening, even though that is, I know they are trying to be comedic or like trying to cause some type of drama with this piano malfunction. But
Yeah.
yeah, so eventually they just like essentially they get shooed off the stage.
Yeah, and they get shoot off the stage, and then I think it's first Queenie kind of goes over and begs with Mr. Zanfield, and then basically says, "Oh, Hank's going to come over and ask us to be part of the show, so just pretend that you're letting us in because it was all I." It's so hard to explain. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. Ultimately, they do end up in the show, and so we kind of jump ahead to the dress rehearsal. I think was the next major scene where they're performing while Eddie sings the Broadway Melody. Again, it keeps coming up over and over again. We hear it throughout the whole film, and Stanfield is there with his, I guess, kind of, they seem like
Posse,
investors, or yeah, I mean,
entourage,
yeah,
the
the
one
guys who
guy,
are financing the show. It seemed like,
and one guy's just perpetually drunk.
yeah, for no reason.
That's just the guy's whole bit. There's
Yeah,
nothing like interesting about him. He is just like,
he's the
I'm
drunk.
wasted, and it's like 12 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah,
Like I don't know what was the like, and we'll just have this guy as a comic relief, and he's just not funny. He's just
yeah,
drunk and
he's
just
just
is like,
drunk.
I'm gonna get on the boat now. That's like a line from him later on when they have the giant boat set piece. I'm just like, I'm tired of this guy. Boo! Like,
Yeah.
like I need one of those like giant like what's it called, the canes to pull somebody off.
Oh, the hook, yeah.
That he would have been nominee number one, I think.
Yeah, they definitely try and give the hook to the girls, but it's other people that should have been really getting it in this film, I think. So during the dress rehearsal, they get cut from the Broadway Melody sequence, and then they go on to this. You mentioned the boat. It's sort of a kind of ancient Roman, ancient Greek setup, where some other guys singing, and one of the, I guess she's a chorus girl of some sort, kind of faints and falls off a prop and gets hurt, and that's what opens up Queenie's path to kind of take a little bit more of a starring role in the picture. And again, like you said, things being kind of silly, it's all very convenient things like that that propel what little story there is forward in this film.
Yeah, like it does feel a bit dramatic because at the times you're like, did this person really fall? They do not cut it to make it seem like it was. It's not like you're watching like a Charlie Chaplin or a Buster Keaton really fall and do these death
Yeah.
like there is the fight at the end of the film between Eddie and Zanville, which we'll eventually get to. It's just all, not to say like, oh, I'm not comparing it to Police Story with Jackie Chan. Like I'm not expecting like old boy levels of like fighting, you know what I mean? But like it is like some of the set piece stuff is just kind of not. I mean, like the settings like are gorgeous. Like I
Yeah.
will get that, but like in terms of like set piece action or set piece like dancing or singing, all rather bland. The only thing that like I could positively say about all these scenes is like the Roman boats and the costumes are that good. That looks really, really good.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that when I put together my ratings, which obviously we'll get to at the end, I kind of break things down by all the various categories, and I think the setting, the production design, if you will,
Yes.
was one of the best. And this goes back to, it's interesting, the previous film that we covered with, directed by Henry Beaumont on this season, was Our Dancing Daughters, and it's another one that's, very, very beautiful sets to look at, some great costumes in that one. Costumes in this one weren't quite as good, I don't think, but I think there's potential there in what's going on in the background. It's just not realized with the actual action on screen.
Mhm. It is not it kinda, like, not to, like, compare it to a more modern comparison, but like the way we recognize the artist for being a silent film in the modern day,
Yeah,
which I think is a very good film. But like, I look at that year and Slate, and I'm like, wow, like, did we just give this a reward for just being different
right.
and like doing something revolutionary? Where the Broadway Melody I think Broadway Melody is, I don't want to say way worse, but it just, I think there can be some similarities tied to both of them.
Yeah, it's definitely it got recognition because of the innovation, I think is what
Mhm.
is ultimately the case. So we get some time passes, and well, actually, after the dress rehearsal, Queenie is gets approached by Jacques Warner. Warner, I'm not
Yes.
really sure how to pronounce his name, how to spell his name. I saw it as Jacques, like the French spelling, but also was Jock. So it was unclear of what it really was. And he was again part of the posse that was sitting there, kind of critiquing the show, but he's obviously kind of a rich playboy type and wants to start up a thing with Queenie. And Hank and Eddie both kind of disapprove of this, but time passes and she's building her relationship with Jacques, but also at the same time has in the process realized that she's got feelings for Eddie too. So that kind of creates a complicated situation there.
Which I just want to point out, this whole love triangle, this E to Mama Tambien, none of it's earned.
No.
None of this feels earned whatsoever. I do not see what either of these women see in Eddie whatsoever, what his trait is. Besides like maybe just possible like what we used to do is just like pit women against each other instead of where I think the Hank and Queenie story is actually very interesting, and all these men are just getting in the way of a
Mhm.
story that could be way, way more fascinating. This whole love triangle or love quadrangle square, not good, not good whatsoever. It doesn't feel earned or has much depth. Despite when I saw I think it's like 100 minutes. Like I was like, oh okay, like we're definitely going to get some like I felt like Wings. If we're going to our last picture, had depth. I felt and I knew these characters. I really can't understand them. I feel like I understood Hank towards the end because they're the one who's like really going for like stardom and like trying to like pursue and even says to Eddie, even though she doesn't mean it, that I was just using you to get ahead in life and that like and she's saying it out of pain that she's being left by Queenie, but there could be some like truth to that as well. It's like, they talk about how they're struggling in New York so much and trying to make it big. And the Mahoney sisters will be seen up there on the big stage. Again, that's actually interesting. The love stuff is just very, very uninteresting and just not well written.
Yeah, and back to my earlier point, it's there to flame for the music is
Yes.
really what it comes down to. It's let's these two sisters are vaudeville stars and they're trying to get on Broadway, so let's put them on a stage and sing some songs, and that's the whole thing.
Mm.
That's the whole conceit of the film. And you're right. I'd love to see someone. Maybe I wouldn't love to see someone remake this movie, but I'd love to see someone remake this in a way where you could explore some of those other things that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think we eventually like do get those. It's so interesting to be like just 30 years later, we'll be getting like Singing in the Rain.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Where you're like, wow, these feel like two complete different mediums.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When I watch Singing in the Rain, I'm like, this is the most beautiful, gorgeous, has dynamic dancing, choreography's on point, the music is unbelievable, the acting is good. Like I don't know. It's just so crazy like where we will go to. And another like maybe a better example is like maybe if you look at something like James Cameron's Avatar where the plot's not really important but the technology is where like
Right.
a lot of which I don't believe in people just saying it's like just Pocahontas but in space. I don't buy into that personally. I think that movie is marvelous in other ways, but maybe do you see like the kind of the compare where like the
Oh yeah. Yeah.
technology is forefront?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it feels like that comes around, every so often. We're moving from silent to sound now. Eventually, we're going to move from, black and white to color. I'm thinking of Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Films like that in the '40s, late '30s, early '40s, where that was the new big thing. And you mentioned Avatar. it happens all the time, and who knows what the next one's going to be. I don't know what else there is for us to innovate in this medium, but there's got to be something in another couple of years that pushes the boundary even further. So back to our very thin plot. I keep saying that, but it really is. There's a whole thing with a couple. It's Queen ends up being Queenie's birthday. There's Hank is going to throw her a party, but then Jacques is also throwing her a party, and she decides to go to Jacques' party, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes.
There's a scene in kind of the backstage dressing room area where Hank and Eddie approach Queenie to say, we really don't like you hanging out with him, and Queenie kind of runs off again. And that's the scene where Queenie and Eddie kind of really start to realize that on both sides that they have feelings for each other, and Hank also sees that and realizes that she has to kind of break things off with Eddie so that Queenie can have a chance with him. But of course, she runs off to Jacques first. Again, going back to your point, it's so confusing. It doesn't really work,
Doesn't
and
matter.
yeah, it doesn't matter. We're just here for the singing. So ultimately, yeah, you mentioned earlier the kind of fight between Eddie and Jacques. The scene that precedes that, actually, with Queenie and Jacques kind of in a back room together, bordering on sexual assault, I think, in that
Oh,
scene.
oh, absolutely. This is like Harvey Weinstein watched this scene, you know what I mean, and like took notes. Like this is some real. And again, I am not going to judge a film in a vacuum of
Right.
1929. What this, I'm sure at the time people were like, "Eh, creepy, weird." Like this guy is trying to coerce this woman into sleeping with them.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is that I see films that tackle this topic today and has this on screen, and it's a lot more interesting and not just like gross and just full of cliches and one liners. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I'm not here to be the PC police when it comes to a film from 1929. That's ridiculous. What I'm trying
Yeah.
to say is that it's all just done in the most boring, simple way. Like it's just
and
not
and
good.
predictable too, I think.
Predictable. Yeah.
We know that Eddie's on his way. We know that he's gonna confront Jacques, and they're gonna have it out a little bit. And again, the shortest, most boring fight between two guys that I've ever seen on screen. I think, like a whole two punches are thrown in that fight, and then Queenie realizes that no, she doesn't want to be with Jacques and leaves with Eddie. And then we cut to Hank and Jed, Uncle Jed, who we didn't even mention earlier, who I think, if we're talking about characters in the film, I think Uncle Jed is my favorite character, but we'll get back to him in a second. So we cut, after Eddie and Queenie leave the party at Jock's, we jump ahead to the very end, and where Hank is reading a letter from the two of them that now they're married and on their honeymoon and on their way back. And again, we don't get a whole lot of explanation there. It's just, yep, they're married now and they're on their way home from their honeymoon. So at the very end, we meet Hank's new performing partner, who
The new blonde.
I think is the blonde who was the saboteur in the piano scene earlier in the film, if I'm not mistaken.
She's also the one that falls, right? I'm pretty sure.
I don't know if it's the same one or not. You might be right. But so the two of them are about to go out. Uncle Jed has booked them on a 30-week tour or something like that, where they're going to go back out and do the vaudeville thing for a while before they come back and try and get back onto Broadway. And that's the end. That's our film.
And then we cut back to cool shots in New York, and I'm like, ah, wow.
Yes. Yeah, there we go.
It went full circle.
Right.
Yeah, Jonathan, I just have to commend you, like, because this plot makes no sense, and I think we did our best job
Yeah.
coming together. Where it's not even that it doesn't make sense; it's just so thin. It is so unimaginably thin that I had to watch this movie twice. I rented it on you can rent it on most places. I rented it on Apple, and I watched it the first time, and I was like, "Am I stupid? Do I not understand?" And I've now reviewed like almost over 100 films in the past year. I go to the cinema like 2 or 3 times a week. Am I dumb? Am I not getting it? And I never had that feeling with Wings, and I rewatched it and tried to really intensely. And nope, you were spot on. It is so thin. The
Yeah.
plot does not matter. It is to highlight like 3 songs that they play over and over again. And at the end of the day, the girl gets the guy, even though he's kind of a loser, like loses that fight. Like what does he offer? And then Hank gets to pursue her dream, but her dream is kind of sad. I mean, if you want to be generous to the film, it actually kind of has a sad ending. Like
Yeah.
Hank kind of loses her sister and now is stuck with this like bimbo woman she doesn't know while she's traveling around trying to survive and this not be broke and have like
Yeah.
honestly like that makes the movie sound way cooler. It's not. It is
Right.
really not. So
No, I think you're absolutely right. And you say she loses her sister, she loses her sister, she loses her boyfriend, and she loses her job. Like she's when you really get down to it, she's having a rough time of it.
yeah, but it's never played as that. It is
Right,
never.
exactly.
That's a way cooler and more interesting plot, which I think like there's something there in this movie that could be really cool, but it just never pursues any of it,
Yeah.
and it just focuses on, as we said, the music, the technological advances, and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on some of the actors and other folks involved in making the film. Obviously, we I talked a little bit about Harry Beaumont with Our Dancing Daughters several weeks back. He was silent film director, continued into the sound years. Anything you have about him that you wanted to touch on?
Harry, not really. I mean, if we're talking just direction of this film, I just really did not find most of it like interesting
Yeah.
whatsoever. I'm not trying to like dunk on the guy for just this one film. I don't think I've seen anything else that he's done, but based on other things you've seen, do you think he gets a bit like a little bit more interesting?
I think I prefer not to spoil anything, but I preferred Our Dancing Daughters to this, even though it was silent. I think overall the direction there is significantly better, and I think one of the things I did see about this film is that they learned a lot through trial and error in terms of the sound aspect of it. I saw initially there was like an orchestra off screen that the actors were singing along with, and then they shifted to pre-recorded music. And one of the other things that I think it was a review or some sort of more modern critique said, a lot of times you have the actors like they're so close together because they're trying to aim their voices at one
Mhm.
microphone off stage or wherever it was. So I mean, there's obviously constraints here that I don't think it excuses the direction, but it explains it if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely explains like what they were just trying, what their vision was for sure.
Yeah, and in one of the other reviews that I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. One of the reviews I saw of from at the time Motion Picture News, the quote that I wrote down was, "The direction is amazing," which I disagree with. Incidentally, is an amazing indication of what can be done in the new medium. So I think I don't agree with the direction being amazing, but it is an indication of what's possible, the potential of having sound in movies at that time.
Yeah, I think from a technical level, it is revolutionary, as we said, but it does feel like there are still they're trying to sort out some of the compression issues. And I noticed that immediately when Eddie was singing Broadway Melody at the first, it just feels like they're like hyper focusing and compressing down his audio really hard in order for it to have some semblance of tune or any type of gravitas. And like for me, it just some of it found sounded like I wouldn't say like underwater, but you know that sound of like something feels like placed under some type of like putting a like talking, if someone puts like a blanket over your head.
Mhm.
I felt some of that when I was like
Yeah.
listening to music, and that just, limitations of the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know I've read I didn't read specifically about this film, but I've read about sound films of that time. They would have because the cameras were so loud, they would actually have to basically build a box around the camera in order to be able to pick up any of the sound on the set. So I'm sure there was plenty of that going on, and I think that kind of leads to one of the things that I noted was that there's not a lot of camera movement. There's a lot of static shots. There's a few things where, we're tracking someone across the room, but it's almost like just a pivot. You're pivoting that
Right.
box where the camera is to follow someone around. So again, not excusing, just explaining, I think is the best way to say that. And it is what it is at this point. Let's see. In terms of the actors, you'd mentioned earlier that you really liked Queenie's character, Anita Page. One of the things I noted about the actors, so Anita Page herself was born in 1910, so just under around 18, 19 years old when this film was made. Charles King, who played Eddie, was born in 1886, so he was 24 years older than Anita Page. So it kind of puts that pairing at the end into a little bit of perspective.
It was a different time.
I know, I know.
Everyone was marrying someone in their 40s when they just graduated high school, or maybe not.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that still goes on today, where we'll be like, "What?" But I think it's more like recognized in the film at
Yeah.
the time. Like, I just got done watching White Lotus, where Amy Lou Wood was with Walton Goggins, and it was just like, "Yep, that's just that's I'm a sugar baby. I need to be with them." So
Yep.
not so much with this one. This one's supposed to be about love, which
Right.
quotations, yeah.
Yeah. She was also in Our Dancing Daughters that we talked about earlier. Same director as well there. I saw a couple things referred to her as a blonde, blue eyed Latin and the girl with the most beautiful face in Hollywood. She was certainly pretty. I don't know if I go so far as to say most beautiful face in Hollywood, but definitely and they point to that in the film that she was kind of only being accepted into the show because of her looks, not because of her singing. So that tracks there.
Not a lot of faces back then. So to be fair, how
That's true.
yeah,
That's true.
by default.
That's right. In terms of Bessie Love, who played Hank, she was the only actor nominated for the film. She actually got her break into filmmaking from D.W. Griffith in his film Intolerance back in the 19 teens, I think, if I remember correctly. And she actually learned how to sing and dance and play the ukulele, which we see a little bit of in this film as well. So well versed in various forms of performance. And then we're also going to see her again, as well as Charles King, who plays Eddie in the Hollywood Review of 1929, which is another one of the films that is was nominated this year. I think in terms of the main three characters, I think Hank was my favorite of the three.
Mhm.
I really liked that scene in the dressing room when she tells Eddie to go after Queenie, and then she kind of breaks down afterward. I think that 30 to 45 seconds was the most acting, so to speak, in the entire film. The most best acting.
Instead of people just standing in rooms and
Yeah, standing
singing.
around and singing.
Yeah, I totally agree when she confesses that she was just using him and that this was all a ruse and that and then ends up at the end when Eddie's already gone that essentially confessing that that wasn't all true at all. Like
Yeah.
that is some grade A, like, wow. That definitely bumped it up a score for me just for her performance there. And she had just such like snarkiness, like the way she confronts the theater owner Zenfield. What's his name again?
Zanfield.
Yeah, and like the way she's able to she feels like someone with actual personality in
Yeah.
the film. I think I like Queenie as more maybe because I always fall for the sympathetic, hopeless romantic in films. Where the true answer is you're correct. Hank has the most like tenacity and is most deserving of the nomination.
Yeah, I think I always go back to the question of who would I like to go hang out at a bar and have a drink with, and I think Hank's the only one I would be able to do that with from this film. Talked a little bit about Charles King as Eddie. He was a stage actor and singer, and was able to make his way. This was actually his feature film debut, I think, from what I read. And but unfortunately couldn't make that transition stick, and eventually just kind of returned to Broadway and stuck with stage acting to finish out his career. So once the novelty of the singing on film died down, I guess it wasn't as in demand as before.
Yeah, you can kind of tell it's his first time on screen.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, he's just there for the songs. I mentioned Uncle Jed while we were doing the end of the plot. He's the stuttering uncle of the two sisters, and I had to look up. I didn't see anything definitive to say whether that was his natural stutter, but it sounded like it was just a kind of a bit that he put on for a lot of his characters. I thought he was the most comic relief out of the whole film, especially with that stutter and how he would kind of change what he was saying in mid sentence when he started to stutter. But I liked him. So the actor's name was Jed Prouty as Uncle Jed, and that's another thing that I've noticed in a lot of films of that time is the actor. If it's a lesser character who's not written with a name already, they just what's the actor's name? All right, that's the character's name.
We don't have time. Put it in the script. What's your name? Whatever. Yeah.
And then the other two that I wrote down as just to mention real quick, Kenneth Thompson, Jacques Warner. He and his wife actually were some of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guilds. That was the one little
Oh,
bit I
no
found out
way.
about him.
That's very cool.
Yep. And Mary Doran as Flo. She was the blonde, the saboteur of the piano. She attended Columbia University. Broadway Melody was only her third feature film that she made. And she will, I think, pop up in a couple more Oscar nominated films, but never made her name onto the list of nominees herself. I always try and talk through the background of the story a little bit, but we've already covered there is no story here, so I'm just going to skip ahead and talk about reviews. I've already mentioned a couple of those. Any other reviews that you wanted to highlight? Anything that caught your eye?
I think there was a New Yorker revisit of the film that I kind of like made me feel less crazy when I read it, where I was like, okay, am I just being like, am I not being the cinephile I think I am? Am I just not cultured enough to enjoy something from this time period? I also had to take a step back and be like, I just watched Wings. I've watched tons of films from the 1920s and been like, wow, these are bangers. These are great, great films. And yeah, it was, I forget who the writer was, but I believe it was from the New Yorker. Essentially wrote like, yes, it is technologically advanced and many of the things we've already said, but it is very drab when it comes to story. It relies heavily on cliches of the time, and there's not like just bland archetypes of characters that just really do not have aged very well. And there's a reason why no one brings up Broadway Melody anymore.
Yeah, the other one that I found, the one from Variety magazine, at the time, it said it's the first flash New York has had as to how the studios are going after musical comedy numbers, and there's no question of the potent threat to the stage producers. The possibilities are what jolt the imagination. This particular interlude classes at just a hint of what's coming. So I think that's obviously singing a refrain that we hear even today, video killed
The radio star.
the movies. Yeah. Streaming has killed DVDs, and
Right.
whatever the next is, something else is going to come along and kill streaming. And I think that was the point there of this is something brand new. It's going to completely change what's to come, which I don't think it was difficult to see that that was the case, but it definitely is the case at that time.
Yeah, and we've seen now from then to almost 100 years later, musicals still dominate the box office, dominate the culture.
Yep.
Wicked, I'm pretty sure Wicked made $1 billion last year or something
Oh,
around
easily.
there. Like
Yeah.
again, musicals every other year will either like win a Best Picture or be nominated. This past year, we had Wicked and Amelia Perez,
Yep. A couple of years back, we had La La Land,
West Side
West
Story.
Side Story. Yep. Yep. So they keep coming.
Yeah, and they will not stop.
No, no, absolutely not. The other one I wanted to point out a little bit more on the negative side, more of a modern critique. Author Mike Massey from the website Gone with the Twins .com. I thought that was pretty clever.
That's good.
Said there's a very plain story at work, ultimately designed to string together singing and dancing performances. The primary problem is that it frequently interferes with the musical numbers and drags out the running time, which we both said already. So, in complete agreement with that sentiment. At the Oscars, the Broadway Melody was obviously the second film to take home what we now call Best Picture, beating out the films Alibi, The Hollywood Review of 1929, In Old Arizona, and The Patriot. As I'm covering all but The Patriot because that's a lost film, and already I've seen in Old Arizona, and I think I prefer that over Broadway Melody. Beaumont was nominated for Best Director, lost out to Frank Lloyd for The Divine Lady, and Bessie Love lost out the Best Actress award to Mary Pickford for her role in Coquette, both of which will be coming up on the podcast in just a few weeks. So stay tuned for those. Well, anything else you want to touch on before we get to our final thoughts and our ratings?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know what my expectations were. I didn't really have any. I did a little minor research about the film and before viewing, and I don't know, maybe because I was so delighted by our last outing by seeing Wings that I like maybe my expectations were a little too high, but man, this just felt like a real nothing burger of a film that I just watched and I will probably forget in the next week. It's just crazy that like they usually just put people on screen and be like, "Yep," that, and just do a little diddly and be like, "Yep, outstanding picture." It just felt like the expectations and standards like, and again, I've now seen movies in the modern day where I'm like, "That one best picture, like
Right.
that's crazy." I don't know with this, I don't know if this warrants as the first best picture like controversy, but like if I was back in 1929, I'd be like, I'm about silent films. I'm not sure about these talkies, my
Yeah.
guy. I'm not sure. So I think the sets were cool. That's like my biggest takeaway.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, I think that's the one kind of positive spot I can give it. If I'm giving a rating, I'm gonna end up on I think a 5 out of 10. So kind of right down the middle of the road.
Yeah.
Story wise, I think I gave it like a 2, but again, the sets maybe 7 or an 8, kind of a little bit higher, but kind of overall that just kind of it's just average at best.
Yeah, I think I'd probably give it like a 4. I really just think it's that forgettable and that like it really just and I watched it twice. I watched it twice because I was like so frustrated with myself and I wish I had spent it doing something else. But again, like it is a piece of history and I like to watch all the best picture winners, outstanding pictures there are. So I'm glad. So if it wasn't for you, John, thank you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have to go through this horrible love triangle that occurred on screen. So, but some of the music, the Broadway melody is pretty good. It is pretty
Yes.
good the first time.
Yeah, we'll make sure to include a link to any of the resources, the articles, reviews that we mentioned, as well as where you can watch the film, The Broadway Melody, for yourself, if you so choose, after listening to us bash it for the last 45 minutes. Well, Kevin, thanks again for coming on the show to talk about Broadway Melody. Remind people one more time where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me on Substack. See you at the movies. I usually release 2 or 3 reviews a week. Just released Sinners. Going to be doing Until Dawn, The Shrouds, Cronenberg. He's coming up. I'm so excited for my man David Cronenberg. Lots of great movies coming out. Friendship with Paul Rudd. Just lots of cool movies coming up. I'm excited to review. So yeah, see you at the movies, and also make sure to check out Jonathan on there. He's awesome.
Absolutely. Don't forget to follow the Oscar Project at theoscarproject.substack.com. And be sure to come back for next Friday's episode of the podcast, where I will be discussing the film Weary River. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.